The Richmond District Courtroom 7 felt stifling under its harsh fluorescent lights. Rows of polished wooden benches were filled with townspeople, journalists, clutching notepads, and uniformed state troopers, whose badges caught every flicker of glare. At the front, a tall black woman in a tailored navy suit, Talia Kensington, stepped through the heavy oak doors. She paused briefly, smoothing the lapel of her jacket, and took in the tense hush that had fallen. All eyes turned to her as she made her way down the aisle. The camera crew in the corner snapped shutters. The local attorneys shifted in their seats. The judge leaned forward on his bench, expression unreadable. Talia's heart beat steadily, but she pressed her lips together, determined not to let her calm facade slip. Without warning, Sergeant Lucian Faulkner, broad-shouldered in his crisp uniform, rose from his seat behind the prosecution table. His voice was low and deadly as he spat out, "You don't deserve to speak of honor." Then, before anyone could move, he reached across the aisle and slapped her hard across the cheek. The sharp crack of his hand meeting her skin echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Some spectators covered their mouths. Others exchanged shocked glances. Yet nobody rose to intervene. Talia's head snapped to the side, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. For a moment, she stood frozen, chest tight, hand curling over the hidden federal badge clipped beneath her jacket. Then just as suddenly, she lifted her chin. Her eyes, steady and clear, met every gaze in the courtroom. In that charged instant, the slap did not silence her. It ignited a quiet storm of resolve. The question hung in the air like a challenge to them all. Would she remain silent, or would she stand up and claim her right to justice? Talia drew in a steady breath and lifted her chin. With deliberate calm, she reached beneath her lapel and produced a sleek silver badge. "I am a special agent of the United States Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General," she announced, her voice soft but unmistakable. The hush that followed was charged with electricity. Spectators leaned forward. Officers froze mid-breath, and the judge paused in mid-stroke. Sergeant Faulkner's face paled beneath his crisp uniform. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but his usual confidence deserted him. The judge's gavel fell like a thunderclap. Sergeant Faulkner stepped down from the bench. Immediately, he commanded, voice echoing off the high ceilings. The courtroom jolted. State troopers stiffened, reporters gasped, and even the stenographer's fingers hovered uncertainly above the keys. Two deputies moved forward, badges glinting in the fluorescent light. One held out a pair of steel handcuffs. Faulkner's broad shoulders sagged as reality sank in, his authority shattered. With a mechanical click, cold metal closed around his wrists. The sound rang through the room like the final note of a symphony, stark, unyielding, irrevocable. The judge's voice softened but carried a firm edge. "Officer Faulkner, you stand charged with contempt of court for your unlawful assault upon a federal witness." Faulkner's lips pressed into a thin line. He stood motionless as the deputies guided him away each footstep, a reminder that no badge places its holder above the law. Talia remained motionless at the podium, her badge still visible, her expression composed. Around her, whispered conversations rose like a tide, questions, astonishment, relief. In that moment, power had shifted irrevocably. What once silenced her had become the very force that upheld justice. The lesson was clear to everyone present: authority misused must answer to something greater than itself. The moment Talia stepped into the courthouse corridor, a wave of reaction swept through the crowd. Reporters pressed forward, microphones extended like outstretched hands, while onlookers, grandparents, young families, even former jurors paused mid-step, their faces reflecting shock, awe, and hope. Some clutched tissues to their cheeks as tears brimmed. Others nodded emphatically, murmuring, "She showed him." The hum of conversation rose to a roar. "Did you see that badge?" Finally, someone stood up for what's right. At the far end, the prosecutor and defense counsel remained rooted to the spot, their expressions vacant, as though they could neither applaud nor protest. Talia halted beneath the pale fluorescent light, her silhouette framed by a line of uniformed bailiffs. She watched as Sergeant Faulkner, now unarmed of authority, was guided toward the exit. His gaze flickered one last time to hers, but there was no bitterness in her eyes, only a calm certainty. In that glance lay her message: the law privileges no one. She let her dark hair fall forward, the vibrant orange of her blazer, a declaration against the muted grays of suits and badges around her. Her posture was relaxed yet firm, shoulders squared, chin lifted ever so slightly. Behind her, a nurse clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "I'm proud of her." A retired school teacher raised her smartphone to capture the moment, while a group of teenagers exchanged hopeful looks as if believing they too might be heard one day. Through the window, sunlight trailed along the corridor's tiled floor, illuminating scattered legal briefs and the echo of Tahlia's footsteps. Without a word, she turned and walked on each step, measured each breath, unhurried. The corridor fell silent in her wake, as though the building itself had paused to acknowledge that justice had for once been given a voice that belonged to us all. The very next morning, social media exploded with reaction. Courtroom justice and law above badge trended across platforms as videos of the slap and Tahlia's composed response circulated at lightning speed. Some viewers cheered in the comments. Finally, someone took a stand. That's real courage under fire. Supporters shared clips with messages of solidarity, pledging to donate to legal aid funds and urging public oversight of law enforcement. Meanwhile, a vocal counter-movement arose. Police are being demonized. What about the poor officer's reputation? Those voices, though fewer in number, accused the system of bias, arguing that Sergeant Faulkner had been unfairly tried by public opinion before a formal ruling. News outlets scrambled to cover both sides. Cable pundits replayed the courtroom footage, dissecting every frame. Local morning shows invited legal scholars and retired officers to debate whether a moment of lost temper should overshadow 2 decades of service. Community Facebook groups lit up with heated discussion, some offering heartfelt prayers for Tahlia's safety, others circulating petitions for Sergeant Faulkner's reinstatement. Amid this whirlwind, Tahlia slipped back into her quiet office. The corridor buzzed with whispered greetings and congratulatory nods, yet she walked past without pause. Inside her private study, she closed the door gently, the click echoing in the hush. Leaning against her desk, she studied the morning's headlines pinned to the bulletin board, praise, condemnation, analysis, each one reminding her how fragile authority can be when left unchecked by principle. She reached for her worn case files, the edges softened from years of handling, and ran her fingers along the embossed cover of her federal badge. In the silence, Tahlia reflected on the day's events, a single act of violence, a swift assertion of lawful power, and the storm that followed. She understood now, more fully than ever, that true strength lies not in force or fame, but in the steady vigilance required to keep the balance between order and justice. As she settled into her chair, she resolved that whatever came next, she would continue to guard that balance with unwavering resolve, no matter how loud the world became. 1 week later, the city held a packed press conference in the municipal building's area auditorium. At the podium, the police chief announced a formal review of Sergeant Faulkner's service record and unveiled a new sensitivity training program for all officers. Behind him, senior brass nodded gravely, their uniforms crisp against the polished wood paneling. Across the room, city council members stood in a line, each offering brief remarks about restored trust between law enforcement and the community. Cameras whirred and microphones bobbed as reporters captured every word. But outside that facade of unity, civil rights organizations pressed loudly for deeper reforms. Representatives from local advocacy groups unfurled petitions demanding an independent oversight board with subpoena power. They called for a publicly accessible dashboard that would track every complaint and discipline action against officers. Transparency is the cornerstone of accountability. One activist declared her voice steady and unwavering. Side conversations broke out among community members, some arguing that this incident was an isolated lapse, others insisting it was a symptom of a system in desperate need of change. On Main Street, storefront windows displayed hastily printed flyers, "Justice for all, no badge above the law and truth in policing." Town hall meetings were scheduled across neighborhoods, east-west, north-south, each promising spirited debate. Letters to the editor filled local newspapers with older residents, recalling days when their voices felt unheard, and younger activists demanding lasting structural shifts. Through it all, Tahlia remained publicly silent. She did not attend the ceremony, nor did she grant interviews. Yet the impact of her actions echoed in every corner of the city. In coffee shops, people spoke her name with respect. In church basements, small groups studied the ripples she set off. Even the murmurs of courthouse staff carried her presence a reminder that one person's calm courage can spark a movement. Though she stayed behind her closed office door, Talia's stand continued to shape the conversation and gave every citizen a reason to ask, how will we ensure true justice going forward? Months after the courtroom drama, Talia Kensington's courageous stand and Lucian Faulkner's downfall became required study material in law schools across America. Professors introduced her case under the heading Judicial Power versus Unchecked Authority, replaying the moment when a single gavel strike reminded everyone that no badge, no matter how shiny, may supersede due process. Students listened attentively as lecturers traced the ripple effects, how Tahlia's composure forced an officer into contempt, and how that one action sparked far-reaching institutional reforms. Meanwhile, Lucian Faulkner faced a series of internal disciplinary hearings. His once immaculate uniform now hung forgotten in a dusty evidence room. Multiple civil lawsuits soon followed, filed by witnesses and civil rights groups. Each docket underscored the same lesson: holding power accountable carries real consequences. Where he had once been lauded for rapid order maintenance, he now found himself under constant scrutiny, his career balanced on the edge of ruin. For those whose voices had been silenced, Talia's example shone like a lighthouse in a storm. Community organizing meetings still bore her name on every agenda. Lessons from the Kensington case. Grassroots groups cited her refusal to bow before threats, her calm reminder that the law answers to no one's badge alone. In churches, community centers, and senior centers, older residents told their grandchildren how one person's quiet courage had inspired an entire city to examine its conscience. Beyond the classroom and courtroom, Talia's impact endured in policy manuals and police training modules. New directives emphasized de-escalation, respect for every citizen's rights, and the imperative that no officer outrank the Constitution. A simple guideline, speak truth even when your voice trembles, appeared on courtroom walls and precinct bulletin boards alike. Though years had passed since that fateful day in courtroom 5, Talia's stand remained a beacon of hope, proof that justice, when carried by courage and principle, can protect the vulnerable and remind everyone that true authority stems not from a badge, but from unwavering respect for the rule of law. Years later, Talia revisited Crestwood, the small town where her cousin Zaire Kensington was killed at just 15. Back then, his death had been written off as a tragic accident during a police pursuit. No one asked why an unarmed boy had fallen to the ground under fire. No one demanded to hear the radio orders that sent officers charging with live rounds. Filled with quiet determination, Talia slipped into the dusty records room behind the old county courthouse, where paper files lay boxed and forgotten. She found Zaire's original case file, handwritten notes, security footage requests, and a single faded photograph of him smiling in a school uniform. Next, Talia tracked down Martin Reyes, the former technician who had secretly saved the raw video from that night. He was living under an assumed name in a neighboring state, still haunted by what he'd witnessed. Talia met him in a dimly lit cafe, and with gentle patience convinced him to entrust her with the sole surviving recording. In that grainy green-tinted footage, Zaire stood frozen in the alley, hands empty, before 3 officers formed a semicircle around him. One weapon rose and a clear voice crackled through the police radio. Proceed with intervention. Use lethal force if necessary. A split second later, the gunshot rang out and Zaire fell. When Talia released the video alongside the newly uncovered radio transcript, the evidence stunned the nation. It revealed that the order had not come from street patrol, but from a high-level judicial official, one whose name had never surfaced in public records. Overnight, the story exploded beyond Crestwood. Newspapers ran front-page headlines demanding justice for Zaire. Lawmakers called for independent inquiries into every radio dispatch that led to a civilian death. Zaire's name, erased for too long, finally carried the weight of truth. In Crestwood's quiet streets, residents gathered under trembling streetlights to watch the grainy footage on tablet screens. Tears were shed for a boy lost too soon. Hope was kindled for a system still capable of correction. And Talia, having reclaimed her cousin's story, showed that even the smallest spark of courage can light the way to justice. In the weeks that followed, the Crisis Response Protocol, or CRP, was exposed as nothing more than a carefully orchestrated public relations machine. Originally pitched as a way to manage emergencies, CRP had quietly morphed into a tool for erasing inconvenient records and shaping every news cycle. Then Silas Kingsley, Talia's first mentor at the Bureau, reappeared after years of silence. He met her in a hushed conference room producing a crisp marked-up copy of CRP's original charter. As Talia watched, Silas described how CRP began as a small team tasked with calmly informing the public during crises. Over time, however, senior officials realized they could suppress any report that cast them in a bad light. They rewrote the protocol to filter which incidents reached the media, scrubbed files of witness statements, and rerouted raw evidence into hidden archives. Silas's voice trembled as he recalled the moment he recognized the shift. A low-level officer had been caught on video planting evidence, yet CRP's press arm quietly buried the story. From that point on, every scandal was handled the same way. Official statements downplayed abuses, internal reviews disappeared, and journalists were fed talking points to deflect attention. The real aim, Silas admitted, was to protect reputations at all costs, even if it meant trampling on justice. As the full picture emerged, the public gasped to learn that entire case files had vanished with no trace. Community leaders demanded full transparency. Investigations were launched into decades of CRP interventions. And through it all, Silas stood by Tahlia's side, finally ready to reveal the system's hidden machinery. Together, they had laid bare a network designed not to serve the people, but to shield the powerful. For older Americans who remember a time when the law truly promised fairness, the CRP scandal was a painful reminder that vigilance and the courage to speak out remain the only defenses against a justice system engineered to protect itself. In a deserted warehouse on the city's industrial fringe, Talia Kensington, Lucian Faulkner, and Silas Kingsley came together like three unlikely conspirators, though their cause was nothing less than justice itself. Under the flicker of a single overhead lamp, they spread out stacks of secret documents on a long, dust-covered table, budget spreadsheets showing unmarked CRP allocations, internal emails stamped confidential that traced every cover-up, encoded authorizations bearing the initials of Chief Judge Octavian Rhodes. Piece by piece, the grim puzzle assembled itself. Lucian traced his finger along a timeline printed on a crumpled map, every suspicious fund transfer, every edited press release, every missing page from Zaire Kensington's file, each link leading back to Rhodes's hidden hand. Talia loaded an old laptop connected to a hacked live stream channel and clicked Go Live. Within seconds, the flickering glow of ancient CCTV footage filled the screen, the radio order to neutralize target accompanied by Rhodes's unmistakable voice. Side-by-side comparisons of draft emails and the polished versions sent to the media. A map highlighting the precise days CRP had scrubbed courthouse records. Silas narrated calmly, pointing to each redacted line. "Here is where they buried the truth," he said, "and here is where they tried to rewrite history." As video clips and scanned memos streamed out to hundreds of thousands of viewers, there was nowhere left to hide. Comments poured in outrage, disbelief, solidarity, because no line of defense could stand against combined proof of power corrupted from the inside. In that moment, behind the crumbling brick walls and broken windows, the trio had staged their own underground trial, not in courtrooms or on paper, but on screens across the nation. The verdict was clear to everyone watching: justice had been hijacked, and it was time for the people to reclaim it. In the months that followed, the hidden architecture of power finally began to crumble. Chief Judge Octavian Rhodes was formally indicted on charges of obstruction of justice and abuse of authority. The CRP Crisis Response Protocol Unit was disbanded, and every file once hidden in dusty archives was reopened under the watchful eyes of congressional committees and independent civilian oversight panels. Although Tahlia Kensington lost her federal commission in the upheaval, she walked away with her integrity intact, sparking what commentators now call the Kensington wave of civic awakening. Her single act of defiance encouraged ordinary citizens from small towns to big cities to demand that no institution be beyond scrutiny. Lucian Faulkner surrendered his badge and honorably resigned, choosing instead to build a quieter life with his wife and young daughter, teaching them the same lessons of courage and compassion he rediscovered. Silas Kingsley, having risked everything to expose a system he once helped construct, retreated to a simple farmhouse in Vermont, content to tend his garden and let the public record stand as his legacy. Most poignantly, Zaire Kensington's name, once a casualty of bureaucratic erasure, now adorns the Zaire Kensington Memorial Scholarship, awarded to promising students of color pursuing studies in law and data ethics. In every year since graduates have stepped forward, anxious to carry Zaire's memory into courtrooms, boardrooms, and legislative halls across the nation. The story closed not on a moment of triumph, but on a broader truth. When the wheels of justice grind to a halt, it falls to individuals, no matter their rank or title, to set them in motion again. Talia's example reminds us that real change often begins with a single refusal to stay silent. As the Kensington wave continues to ripple through communities, one thing remains clear: if the system ever turns its back on justice, it is our duty to reclaim it firmly, peacefully, and without apology. From this story, we learn the power of conscience and courage when facing injustice. The clear message is that no authority stands above the law, and no one may wield power to oppress others because of skin color or social status. If I were the protagonist, my next step would be to continue restoring forgotten records, organize community dialogues to share experiences, and encourage everyone to speak up whenever they witness wrongdoing, even if they stand alone. Change must not only happen in the courtroom, but must ripple into families, schools, workplaces, in every street corner. As for whether racism will vanish by 2050, the answer lies with us. If we each resolutely condemn hate speech, actively teach younger generations about equality, and hold public servants to higher standards, then 2050 could mark a milestone when most prejudice is erased. Conversely, if we remain silent and ignore injustices, racism may persist into future generations. Only when every individual chooses to stand for truth and justice can society truly reach a day without discrimination.